Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Pierre Brutus. I am a senior counsel at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I lead the Institute's reparations work, and I am the convener of the New Jersey Reparations Council. Welcome, all of you, to the sixth public session of the council, hosted by the Democracy Committee. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Press is in attendance to listen only. Closed captioning is available for anyone who needs it. Just hit the button. In this public session, the committee will discuss their work on the Democracy Committee. And in the second half of this session, it will be open and available to public comment for those of you who have registered beforehand. This is the sixth of our 9 public sessions. We will have our 7th public session in October, hosted by Environmental Justice. Be on the lookout for that, for our information on that. And then we'll have an 8th public session in November, hosted by our Public Education and Narrative Committee. And we'll have our 9th and final public session in December, hosted by our Economic Justice Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you to our partner at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for making the New Jersey Reparations Council possible. You will hear from Sharif Braxton, Community Officer, shortly. You will also hear from the committee members, as well as our co-counsel, our co-chair of our council, Khalid Ghuram Mohammed, and then we will open up to public session. The question we often confront doing this work is, why engage in the New Jersey Reparations Council? And that answer is, although slavery shaped every aspect of New Jersey, too many people in our state believe that it never happened here and that racial inequality is not a New Jersey issue. But as you will hear tonight, New Jersey's original sin of slavery and its lasting stain tell a very different story. Co-chaired by Khalid Ghuram Mohammed and Ty Jania Henderson, and comprised of local, state, and national experts, the New Jersey Reparations Council is finally confronting and working to repair their enduring harm from New Jersey's deep and often overlooked institution of slavery, and enduring impact on the contemporary life of Black people in our state. Because these inequalities have been reinforced by generations of policy design, rooted in slavery, not by individual behaviors, but by structural inequality, they must be repaired by design. The council will not only propose bold strategic policies to repair their enduring harm to Black people from slavery, but will also answer this foundational question, and that is, what kinds of reparative systems does New Jersey need to build for Black people to finally be free, to finally thrive, free to win, to be whole, to have racial justice here in New Jersey? Our affirmative vision is for the council is to think boldly and imaginatively, and to propose solutions that address the varied and manifold harms of slavery, and address the structural racism at the core through reparative policies and investments that are commensurate and proportional to the enduring harm from slavery. This past Juneteenth, the council, on this upcoming Juneteenth in 2025, the council will produce a report drawing direct connections between New Jersey's history and its present, and propose comprehensive policy recommendations that will on their own serve as a blueprint for how New Jersey can repair their enduring harm of slavery, and also act as a vast resource to the New Jersey Reparations Task Force that New Jersey will ultimately create through laws, thanks to the ongoing advocacy of our faith allies for reparations partners. As we look ahead to the council's work, it is both thrilling and, to be sure, daunting, but we know the only way forward to building a new New Jersey is through. We are convinced that every movement for racial justice requires fierce and independent advocates to lift their voices when others won't. We are also convinced that the New Jersey Reparations Council, building on decades-long fight in this state, will help to move the issue of reparations from unsafe and unpalatable and impossible to inevitable and conventional wisdom. And we thank you for standing with us. I am now pleased to pass the mic to Sharif Braxton from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Thank you for that, Jean-Pierre, and good evening, everyone. As Jean-Pierre mentioned, I'm Sharif Braxton, the Community Officer here at the New Jersey Department of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and I'm honored to briefly speak with you today. My colleagues and I at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation are steadfastly committed to achieving health equity in New Jersey, which means that everyone who calls our state home has a fair and just opportunity to live their healthiest life possible. Yet the current reality is that there are large, persistent, and increasing gaps in opportunities for health and well-being across neighborhoods and communities, depending on who you are and where you live. In 2021, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention declared racism a public health issue that affects the health and well-being of millions of people directly. And as the nation's largest philanthropy dedicated to health, we deeply believe in dismantling structural racism and the barriers that millions face every day simply because of their race or their intersectionality with other groups that experience oppression. We all have a responsibility and the ability to achieve health equity by striving for racial equity and treating the root cause of disparities. And in order to do this right, it requires a great deal of research, planning, and public dialogue like we're having today. Since 2021, the foundation has funded efforts to learn from the global experience and impact of reparations, learn how reparations could close the racial health and wealth gaps that persistently impact Black Americans and Indigenous people, and also to strengthen the reparations field directly by supporting organizing efforts, capacity building, and technical assistance, and building towards federal, state, and local policy action. Now, the foundation is funding the New Jersey Reparations Council to serve as the leading edge of efforts to convene a non-governmental process to initiate the necessary work. As a funder of the council, the foundation is clear in our stance that the time has come for New Jersey to create a shared understanding of the harms caused to Black New Jerseyans over the past 4 centuries and embark on a process to remedy these injustices. We see the council's work as a critical precursor to realizing the justice that our governments owe to Black New Jerseyans. To achieve this, we need federal, state, and local governments to take up the mantle of this work. In 2008, we saw an important acknowledgement of structural racism and its resulting harm when the New Jersey State Legislature passed a resolution apologizing for past leaders perpetuating the institution of slavery. But our home state needs much more intentional action to repair generations of harm, and it needs it now. That's why the foundation, as part of our policy agenda for a healthier and more equitable New Jersey report, is calling on the state of New Jersey to impanel an official task force to begin a process of addressing historical and present harms. That task force would ideally include a diverse group of people, including community members and affected residents, who have the authority to make recommendations to the legislature, governor, and agencies, such as how to reinvest funds in affected communities. Together, we have an opportunity to set a national example by addressing structural racism in a thoughtful and comprehensive manner, and our commitment to do so is rooted in our dedication to health, equity, and justice. Bringing history to light can help shape a more accurate narrative of the impact that structural racism has played and continues to play in New Jersey residents' health and well-being, particularly communities of color. My colleagues and I are proud to be on this journey and eager to engage in the hard work it requires, and I'm excited about the crucial discussions we'll have here today. I thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I pass it back to you, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you so much, Sharif. I really appreciate it. And now it's my honor to introduce one of our co-chairs, Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who will introduce the members of our Democracy Committee, Saladin Ambar, Madiba Denny, Jesse Burns, Iman Campbell, Larry Ham, and Richard Roper. Professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad is the Ford Foundation Professor of History, Race, and Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School. He directs the Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability Project and is the former director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, a division of the New York Public Library, and the world's leading library and archive of global Black history. Before leading the Schomburg Center, Khalil was an associate professor at Indiana University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Muhammad.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, JP. And again, it's great to be back together in this community of justice advocates for this important work that we are doing together on behalf of the residents of New Jersey, and an opportunity to make light of centuries of oppression and the inability of both the country and the state to come to terms with that history in ways that would make Black people in this world whole again. I want to take a moment to introduce tonight's committee members on the democracy panel. And we are joined by them. And I'm going to first introduce the two essentially co-chairs of the Democracy Commission and then the members. I'll start with Dr. Saladin Ambar, is a senior scholar at Eagleton Center on American Governance, as well as a professor of political science at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. He is the author of 4 books, including Malcolm X at Oxford, Racial Politics in a Global Era, which was nominated for a Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Best Nonfiction, and as well a more recent book, Stars and Shadows, which is a book about the political saliency of some really significant relationships between Blacks and whites over several centuries of American history. As the co-chair of Democracy Committee, he's joined by Madiba Denny. She is deputy director and senior contributor at Balls and Strikes and author of The Originalism Trap. Her work focuses on fostering an equitable, multiracial democracy. She is currently writing her debut book, forthcoming from Random House, congratulations, about reclaiming the Constitution for the people. Previously, she served as counsel I'm sorry, I saw the book behind you. I was like, wait, did the book come out? Sorry. She is currently serving as counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice, counsel to the New York City Council Committee on Public Housing, and a Kirkland and Ellis Public Service Fellow at Her Justice. And to the members, I'll start with Jessie Burns. She has been with the League of Women Voters of New Jersey since 2007. It is the leading organization for the last 5 years in this space. During that time, the League has strengthened its position as a critical, influential, and trusted voting rights and civic engagement organization, educating hundreds of thousands of voters about important election and advancing equitable policy reforms. Under Jessie's leadership, the organization has added several new chapters, tripled its staff, and has been instrumental in passing several pieces of voting rights legislation, including online voter registration, automatic voter registration, and a number of other key policy interventions. I'm now turning to, I'm embarrassed, I can't remember. Iman, pronounce your name, unmute. I want to mess this up.
Iman.
Iman Campbell is currently the Marilyn M. Karpatkin Legal Fellow with the Racial Justice Program at the National ACLU. Prior to joining the ACLU, Iman completed a year-long judicial clerkship with New Jersey Appellate Division Judge Thomas Sumners, Jr., and graduated from Rutgers Law School in 2021, where he won the John J. Skelly Wright Prize for the greatest contribution to civil rights, civil liberties, and human affairs, as well as a number of other awards. Larry Ham is a founder and current chairman of the People's Organization for Progress, a statewide independent grassroots organization. POP works for racial, social, economic justice, and peace. Established in 1982, the People's Organization for Progress has been in existence for 40 years. Well, more than that now, 42. As chairman, he has consistently worked toward building unity among community organizations, the struggle for quality education, employment opportunities, access to healthcare, and against racial profiling and police brutality continue throughout these efforts. As chairman, Larry Ham has served as a president of the 24th District Assembly, founder and director of the People's Energy Cooperative, a community fuel oil cooperative. He's been director of the Community Organization Program of the United Church of Christ, its Commission for Racial Justice, and co-chairman of Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign in New Jersey. He's also been the president of the New Jersey Rainbow Coalition. It's great to see you, Larry. And last but not least, we have Richard Roper joining us this evening. As a member of the Democracy Committee, he is a public policy consultant, retired in 2010 as director of the planning department of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Previously, he served 11 years as president of the Roper Group, a public policy consulting firm specializing in economic and social policy research and analysis. He was director of Port Authority's Office of Economic and Policy Analysis and director of the Port Authority's Office of Business and Job Opportunity. Prior to that, Mr. Roper served as senior fellow at the Nelson A. Rockefeller Institute, of Government at the State University of New York in Albany, in several roles at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson, or formerly Woodrow Wilson, now the School of Public and International Affairs, and Assistant Dean of Graduate Career Services. He has served in a number of additional academic roles, and we are grateful for his contributions to the Democracy Committee. And with that, we are going to begin our conversation. I believe that is Ryan going to join us, JP?
No, Ryan will not be joining us this evening.
Okay. So I believe that we will first hear this evening from the committee chairs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Madiba. She will discuss the work of reparations within this Democracy Committee's work.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Madiba Denny, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Democracy Committee of the New Jersey Reparations Council. Over the past year or so, our committee has been meeting to think about how the legacy of slavery has shaped democracy in New Jersey, how New Jersey's democracy has disserved the state's Black residents as a result, and how the state can begin to restore what was lost through that anti-democratic deprivation. Our discussion of ways democracy has fallen short for Black New Jerseyans included and went beyond the ballot box. In addition to threats to formal democracy like voter suppression and gerrymandering, we considered threats to informal democracy like restrictions on protests and the freedom of expression. Similarly, our conversations about what reparations would entail included and went beyond the checkbook. Financial compensation for Black people is one of multiple necessary steps towards fostering an equitable democracy in New Jersey. Multiple state and local governments are researching the need for reparations in their localities, what it would entail, and how it would be implemented. The New Jersey government ought to be asking itself these same questions. Right now, there is a bill sitting in the New Jersey legislature that would establish a task force to address the harms caused by New Jersey's role in slavery and ongoing racial discrimination. That bill and others like it must become law, and it is my hope that this committee's work can spark more legislative action. I'm sure I speak for all the members of the Democracy Committee when I say we are delighted to have this opportunity to engage with the public about what we have done so far. But also tonight, all of the committee members will be speaking for themselves. So to start, I would like to turn it over to my co-chair, Dr. Saladin Anbar.
Madiba, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you who are joining this evening and taking your time out to hear what the Democracy Committee has been working on. Madiba is right. You know, New Jersey is one of several states that have currently and most recently begun to investigate reparations as a practical policy solution for decades and indeed centuries worth of harm. California has agreed to spend up to $12 million on reparations legislation under its budget proposed by its governor, Gavin Newsom. New York's Governor Kathy Hochul has announced the appointment of 9 members to a New York State Commission on reparations. And so New Jersey is but the latest in this movement for restorative justice. You know, it's interesting when you think about New Jersey, it's often associated with a northern/progressive history and current day politics. But the fact of the matter is that New Jersey has rather played an intermediary role with respect to the doling out of democratic benefits to its citizens. It has neither been northern nor fully southern. And for its Black residents, we have tended to occupy a kind of shadow land within New Jersey's democratic governance. Historically, formally, and informally, Black justice has been lagging sorely behind that of New Jersey's fully enfranchised citizens. I want us to just think about what do we mean by democratic rights and why democracy in a discussion of reparations. Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution guarantees to every American, guarantees, and it's the only time the word guarantee is mentioned in the Constitution, guarantees to everyone to live under a Republican form of government. What the Constitution doesn't address or doesn't really ask, and we are forced to ask, is what is it like to be absent from being part of a Republican/representative form of government. Black New Jerseyans were first granted the right to vote in 1776, after well over 100 years of having lost that right. But then later in New Jersey's 1844 Constitution, that right to vote was rescinded. It wasn't until 1870 and the ratification of the 15th Amendment that Blacks in the state would become eligible to vote once again. This despite New Jersey's opposition to both the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. Now, this begs a fundamental question. What is the value of a single vote? What is the value of the right to vote? In his second inaugural address, you'll recall Abraham Lincoln suggested that the Civil War itself was a form of divine retribution for the loss of Black lives and Black wages. While poetic, we are not interested in theoretical or heavenly compensation for historical wrongs. What is the real world restorative justice platform to be premised upon? To go back further in thinking about democracy and thinking about reparations, particularly in New Jersey in democratic terms, famously John Marshall once said, "The power to tax is the power to destroy." But New Jersey's Black residents have historically paid their taxes. If we go back to the very founding with the 3/5 compromise, the very tax policies of the nation were premised upon the idea that only 3/5 of African Americans would be counted for the purpose of Southern taxation. African Americans in New Jersey, like other states, were stripped of their basic rights for generations. And then once legally restored, other informal mechanisms were employed to curtail their political rights, including the right to self-expression, protest, and to be represented in the state's leading political and social institutions. In short, the harms suffered by Black New Jerseyans include, but are not limited to, the loss of the right to vote, to hold office, to be equally and fairly represented in their districts, to safely petition the government for their rights through peaceful protests, to express their opinions through newspapers and other media without threat or implicit sanctions, to be afforded equal rights and status in the state's political parties, including the ability to be represented fairly on the state's ballots, and finally, to have the constitutional right to be accurately counted in the United States Census. The basis of representation and the bestowal of economic resources to these communities have been long overdue for being fulfilled. Just to harken back to the 3/5 compromise again, a good question to ask and to consider is how much additional revenue was generated by New Jersey and other slaveholding states by keeping 40% of the prospective taxes over the course of decades taken from the counting of Black bodies. Well, we know this, that today New Jersey has one of the highest racial gaps, wealth gaps in the country, a staggering $300,000 per household, which is almost twice that of the national racial wealth gap. So we have considerations that we'll be talking about this evening for restorative justice. And it's important to remember that the United States government has already engaged in reparations. White slaveholders, not those they enslaved in the District of Columbia, were compensated for the loss of their property. Today, the United States compensates families for wrongfully killing their citizens in nations that we are in conflict with. The denial of political rights and the right to live in a democratic society similarly involves engaging in the difficult but necessary calculation of fairness and justice with respect to democracy and the loss of fundamental rights. In short, again, the shadowy character of Black freedom has been fortified by a host of, difficult, to put it mildly, if not atrocious, fundamental policy prescriptions, strict voter registration laws, violent repression, and including segregation. Racial inequality was upheld in the state's educational institutions. Where I'm at, my office right now at Rutgers University, the first African-American, Dixon Carr, did not attend until 1888. Well, I won't bore you any longer as my time is running short with the long legacy of democratic rights, but as our panelists tonight will show, New Jersey's history has profoundly reflected the nation's shortcomings with respect to both its formal and informal democratic life. The features of our republic enshrined in law, yes, but also customs and cultural practice. This legacy of Black political life in New Jersey, now approaching 400 years, dating to the arrival of enslaved Africans in what was then New Netherlands in 1626, is one of trauma, repression, duplicitousness, but it is also a history of resistance, courage, and principled struggle. Righting the wrongs and harms inflicted upon New Jersey's Black population will involve the work of all invested in the state and nation's democracy, and this restorative and reparative work will begin first with a direct confrontation with New Jersey's partial, shadowy, and selectively administered democracy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Ambar. What a really stirring way to begin this conversation with our public community. And the characterization of the halting and aborted form of democracy as a shadowy figure in the life of Black freedom in the state, I think, is a very powerful metaphor for the ways in which the promise of freedom often came with this darkness that would never actually fulfill the true possibilities. I also want to just say, as we move to the next member, that it may not be obvious to many people the relationship between, as what you call, democratic benefits to a claim of reparations. But as you rightly point out, the mechanism for oppression ran through a democracy that was for whites only. And so restoring the possibility of a full freedom for Black people in the state of New Jersey also means reckoning with this history of illiberal democracy as we understand it. At this time, I'd like to turn our attention to our next speaker, to Jesse Burns. And Jesse, if you'll come on in, I'll start it with a question. In what ways has New Jersey used voter suppression tactics to limit Black political power, and how might reparations help achieve a multiracial democracy?
Thank you so much for that question. And you know, it's a great honor and a real privilege to participate as a member of this committee. I've learned so much from other committee members, and I look forward to, you know, truly listening and learning from the public comments this evening. So while I'm going to discuss some democratic reforms that could begin to undo the harms of voter suppression tactics targeted to ensure Black Americans could not achieve political equity, it's with recognition, as Madiba pointed out at the top, that these policies are not meant to take the place of cash payments. Alongside financial restitution, building Black political power through democratic reforms can help sustain a new democracy that better serves our state. Voter registration has consistently been used as a voter suppression tactic. In particular, unnecessary timelines, some residency requirements, purges, and voting roll errors have been shown to disproportionately disenfranchise Black voters. Despite data showing that same-day voter registration demonstrates a significant voter turnout increase for communities of color, legislation to pass same-day voter registration has stalled in the New Jersey legislature for at least 20 years. Same-day voter registration also provides a critical safety net against voting roll purges, ensuring that if voters are erroneously removed from the rolls, they'd still be able to cast a ballot. Another reform that New Jersey should pass is allowing folks to vote while incarcerated. While it's really a true triumph that after a significant and long advocacy campaign, New Jersey passed legislation to grant the right to vote to people on parole or probation. We continue to disenfranchise folks incarcerated for felony convictions. In addition, we make it incredibly difficult for eligible voters to cast ballots while in jail for misdemeanors. Because of racial disparities in our criminal justice system, Black voters are disproportionately impacted by this system that makes it either illegal or impossible to vote while incarcerated. New Jersey can pass legislation to decouple the criminal justice system from voting, allowing for folks incarcerated to never lose their right to vote. We can also institute systems that allow for easy access to ballots and voter education information for folks while they are in prison or serving jail sentences. In addition, we can expand automatic voter registration to the Department of Corrections to ensure that justice-involved individuals have opportunities to register or update their voter registration information upon release. So as Saladin mentioned, the voter registration suppression tactics are ongoing in New Jersey and things that we're still facing right now. And while New Jersey is sometimes thought to be a national leader, again, as Din mentioned, in democracy reforms, refusal to remove barriers to voter registration, as well as other reforms that I'll speak to in just a few minutes, illustrate that our state is not the progressive beacon some wish to claim. Reforms that even slightly threaten to shift power from incumbents, political bosses, and political parties to New Jersey's voters are met with extreme resistance and left to die without ever receiving a committee hearing and the ability to hear from the public. Another example of this refusal to consider these kind of reforms is our continued resistance to adopting independent commissions and redistricting. In New Jersey, the power to draw the state's legislative and congressional districts belongs to two commissions consisting of political appointees and tiebreakers. And while multiracial coalitions have won significant improvements in recent years, including ending prison gerrymandering, pressuring the commissions into a more public process, and submitting racial equity maps for consideration, New Jersey still draws its districts to favor politicians over voters. Given the partisan nature of these appointments and the overwhelmingly white and male politicians controlling this power, the commissions do not accurately serve the diverse voters of this state. Voters of color are most impacted by the partisan nature of New Jersey's redistricting and apportionment commissions. Independent redistricting commissions beholden to voters and not politicians in other states have demonstrated that they are more likely to listen to Black voters and, importantly, change their draft maps based on that public feedback. New Jersey's recent redistricting commissions have failed to prioritize racial equity, even when presented with maps from large racial justice coalitions. Proposed constitutional amendments from democracy coalitions that would institute independent commissions have been met by legislative proposals that instead seek to further entrench partisan gerrymandering and grow political power for legislative leaders. Protections against gerrymandering can also be offered by a strong state voting rights act, particularly as we continue to face weakening of the federal VRA. A strong state VRA would codify protections under the federal VRA that protect Black voters by prohibiting intimidation, vote dilution, and voter suppression. A state VRA would also expand protections and resources, increase language access, and create a state pre-clearance program to guard against things like improper polling place consolidation and closures that impact Black voters. New Jersey can also institute reforms that make running for office more accessible. Dark money has funded anti-voter campaigns designed to suppress Black votes. New Jersey should consider public financing for candidates that mirror previous attempts to institute small dollar match campaigns. While public financing cannot necessarily limit the influence of outside dark money, it can help counteract some of the undue influence of wealthy white donors, making candidates more accountable to their communities and the constituents they will serve. And no list of Democratic reforms would be complete without talking about the infamous county line. a ballot design unique to New Jersey that structures candidates based on party endorsements as opposed to office sought. Racial justice organizations have demonstrated that the county line impedes Black voters from being able to effectively cast a ballot. It makes candidates more accountable to a few powerful political bosses rather than the diverse communities they're meant to serve. Due to ongoing legal battles, the county line is closer to being a relic of the past. And while office block design should take its place, there remains unease of the legislators' willingness to relinquish this power. This short and non-exhaustive list of reforms is not particularly revolutionary and can be enacted in our state right now. Many pieces of legislation are pending, many stalled, that would make these reforms a reality. But our democracy is designed to suppress voters of color and has consistently invented new ways to ensure that power remains in the hands of white men. Knowing this, it's important to understand that while these recommendations are important, they will only begin to bridge significant gaps in political power while giving the tools and resources needed to fight for a multiracial democracy. The reimagining of American democracy requires a constant and bold vision centered on racial equity, ready to evolve in the faces of new challenges as they arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I think that it should be clear to many people listening to this conversation the surprising landscape of reforms that would optimize democratic participation for Black people in the state of New Jersey, for whom a very long history of democratic disenfranchisement and exclusion deserves a contemporary legislative policy agenda that would overcome much of that history that we still live with. And I appreciate personally, Jesse, your lifting up the ways in which the criminal justice system functions as a huge bulwark against participation for those, one, who have not, in fact, been convicted of a crime, who are currently serving, and I should say detained in a jail, and the degree to which we could represent a state that looks a lot like many other liberal democracies in parts of the world, where any form of a criminal conviction does not, by definition, disqualify one from participating in democracy. I will admit, as co-chair of this committee, even learning the degree to which voter suppression efforts from this committee's work are active in the state of New Jersey only speaks to how urgent so much of the work of the committee truly is. So thank you very much for that, Jesse. We're going to turn to Iman at this time for taking on an issue that I think is very important to the grassroots work that is so critical to building a multiracial democracy. So the question for Iman is this: what role has activism played in the democratic process, and what role can it serve in bringing about reparations for Black Americans?
Thanks so much, Khalil. I'm glad to be with everyone this evening. And the importance of activism, I think, cannot be missed. I think a part of the larger and longer tradition of Black people in this country is to engage in activism. And New Jersey, Black residents of New Jersey were certainly not outside of that tradition. And I think what we have is that a brief glimpse of New Jersey history demonstrates Black people, Black residents expressing themselves politically. And these expressions were based on serious grievances such as limited access to the franchise, some of what Jesse has spoken about, segregation, housing and job discrimination, and anti-Black violence. Now, despite their efforts to engage in protected First Amendment activity, there are serious questions as to whether the First Amendment has applied equally to Black residents in New Jersey, especially during the second half of the 20th century, as racial tensions flared in cities throughout the state. So I'm going to go through just a few historical flashpoints in New Jersey to highlight the ways in which Black people engaged in activism and informal democracy, exercising their First Amendment rights, but at the same time, face serious state repression. So, thinking about or looking at the 19th century, Black organizations in the North contributed significantly to the abolitionist and suffrage movements. For example, the Convention of Colored Citizens of New Jersey, which was founded in 1849, that organization advocated that the most effective way of securing the right to vote was through petitioning the state legislature. Now, this is an action, of course, very much couched in the petition clause of the First Amendment and the New Jersey Constitution. For example, they petitioned to remove the word white from the constitutional section on the right to suffrage so as to grant the right of the franchise to all citizens in the Garden State, irrespective of color. Black New Jerseyans generally also produce pamphlets to advocate for the franchise and engage in larger formal and informal networks nationally around the issue of the franchise of voting while localizing it to New Jersey. So Black folks were involved in a larger national conversation, but they were certainly specific to New Jersey as well. Now, moving to the late 19th and early 20th century, school segregation was an important issue for Black New Jerseyans. Now, while New Jersey was one of the first states to formally outlaw school segregation based on race, the law wasn't effectively enforced. So from 1899 to 1905, Black parents in East Orange, New Jersey, for example, engaged in direct action protest to desegregate schools in the city. They will also boycott, hold mass meetings, and also petition. Now, for example, over 100 parents and supporters would show up to the city's Board of Education meetings to protest school segregation in the city. The spirit of the protest, however, it wasn't just limited to education. Now, moving a little more forward, this was highlighted in 1918 when members of the New Jersey Federation of Colored Women's Club joined thousands of marchers carrying American flags to participate in a silent protest throughout downtown Newark, protesting the lack of support for the dire anti-lynching bill. These are actions that Black people are engaging in northern New Jersey, specifically targeting their cities, specifically targeting New Jersey, but is a part of the larger fabric and tapestry of Black protests throughout the nation addressing these very issues. Now, looking at the mid 20th century, specifically the civil rights and Black power movements, Black New Jerseyans continued to express themselves politically on issues such as segregation of public facilities, but also on police brutality, along with housing and employment discrimination. Now, while they were engaging in protests, sometimes these protests took the forms of rebellions in New Jersey cities. So 1967 becomes a very important year. So, for example, in Plainfield, that was one of the cities where Black residents engaged in violent combative demonstrations because of segregation, job discrimination, and the lack of access to formal political processes. Indeed, the demonstrations that took place in Plainfield and elsewhere in the Garden State were a part of the what scholars call the long, hot summer of 1967, a year where race rebellions unfolded all over the nation. Now, the events in Plainfield were triggered by a white police officer who was well known for his racism at the time, where he shot and severely wounded a young Black man. Now, protesters, of course, addressed the officer and violence erupted, but this was a part of a larger concern about police brutality and the way the police would operate within these cities without engaging Black residents in any significant way that was meaningful and respected their rights. During the same year in Newark, there was a 4-day rebellion, pretty well known to folks in New Jersey and elsewhere, in Newark, where John Smith, a Black cab driver, was severely beaten and dragged into police headquarters by 2 white Newark police officers. Black residents decided to protest outside of the precinct. Now, during this 4-day rebellion, it was learned that Newark police officers killed 24 Black residents, those of whom weren't engaged in any kind of violence themselves. So what we have is individuals who are demonstrating their First Amendment rights here. However, they are still left with their bodies brutally beaten and sometimes murdered or killed. So to kind of put a fine point on this, these brief historical flashpoints here illustrate the ways in which Black residents in the Garden State exercise their First Amendment right to address racial discrimination and anti-Black violence. Now, when Black New Jerseyans departed from formal mechanisms of political expression, at times because those channels did not allow for their voices to be meaningfully heard, or because the brutal conditions required that they engage informally, they were met with unconstitutional practices and brutality from the state and local law enforcement, and oftentimes did not have their issues addressed in any meaningful and impactful way. Thus, there are serious questions, I believe, that are left unanswered as to whether the First Amendment has actually protected Black people in the Garden State, has been equally afforded to Black New Jerseyans and indeed Black people throughout the nation. And so as we continue this work, I do believe that where we are is not just in terms of addressing more formal practices, but informal practices, the ways in which the First Amendment applies to Black New Jerseyans and whether the First Amendment can be actualized for them. And I think that is something that we are taking up very strongly in this committee and will be laid out more formally as we continue this work.
Thank you so much, Iman. You know, there's so many ways that doing this work provides clarity on the fundamentals of what citizenship is about. So much of the world that we know it in this state, part of this country, offers to its white citizens, certainly historically, basic protections that in many instances, but certainly not in all, they did not even know were operating amongst their many civil liberties. And by your pointing out the various ways in which African Americans sought to gather, to organize politically, such as the colored conventions, sought other forms of demonstration and the right of public assembly, as in protest against school segregation going back to 1918. And even the more direct physical confrontation with the state's role in oppression, which is a tradition certainly in the United States that goes back to literally creating the conditions for war against Great Britain, that became part of the history of the so-called American patriots who gave birth to the United States out of the colonial period. In each of those 3 instances, placing the Newark Rebellion within that long historical trajectory situates Black people in this state as democratic standard bearers of the oldest traditions in this country to expand the possibility of democracy. So I just wanted to emphasize on that final point, this notion that the First Amendment itself has been a tool for defining the very basic protections that democracy affords its citizen, should be the basis of a reparations claim at this time, precisely because it illustrates in very clear terms what is at stake in building a future of New Jersey that can embody the best traditions of multiracial democracy. Thank you so much for that, Iman. And now we will hear from our next committee member, We are going to hear from the inimitable and incomparable Larry Ham, who will discuss the processes for the struggle of reparations and the history of that struggle in this state. Larry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Khalil. Can you hear me? Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Today we're talking about the relationship between democracy and reparations. And my basic position is that if we achieve reparations, it won't be because of the democratic political system. It will be in spite of it. I think if we go and we look at the origins of the reparations struggle, of course, one of the most popular slogans is 40 acres and a mule. When we look at that particular situation, it came out of General Order number 15 from General William Tecumseh Sherman. It was a military order. It was a wartime measure. It was not something that was voted upon by Congress. That General Order number 15, which expropriated 400,000 acres of land from slave masters and was to distribute it to the slaves, became the basis of H.R. 29, which was introduced by Thaddeus Stevens. But after the assassination of Lincoln, Andrew Johnson comes to power, and he vetoes that and other steps that had been taken to empower the freed people. So H.R. 29 was never voted upon by both houses and forwarded to the president for his signature. So the question that faces us today is, how do we achieve reparations through a political system that was established, in fact, on the enslavement of our ancestors? In fact, a political system that not only was established, but thrived on the exploitation of our ancestors. As this pertains to New Jersey, in 2003, Assemblyman Craig Stanley introduced a reparations bill. At that time, as you remember, Khalil, I believe The Debt by Randall Robinson was very popular. And Randall Robinson was still with us. He was going around the country. He was lecturing. The reparations movement was on fire. And Assemblyman Stanley introduced this bill, by the way, right after Assemblyman Bill Payne had introduced a bill for New Jersey to apologize for slavery. That apology did pass, but I think it had a kind of exculpatory clause in there that apology, could not be used as the basis to hold the state of New Jersey liable. But there was an apology. But Assemblyman Stanley introduced that reparations bill. Guess what happened? The leadership of the assembly told Assemblyman Stanley, don't call it a reparations bill, call it a reconciliation act. You remember in the struggle against apartheid, once the racist apartheid regime was overthrown in South Africa, they set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So this was an attempt to expropriate that idea and use it here. Assemblyman Stanley did accept the name change, but the fundamental features of the reparations bill initially were kept intact. But there was an attack by forces within the legislature and outside of the legislature, and the bill went through several amendments. One of the key amendments was to replace or to remove the commission members, which were to be made up of grassroots organizations that had been fighting for reparations, made up of grassroots organizations fighting for reparations, and also the legacy civil rights organizations. That was taken out, and the commission was to be made up of experts. But nonetheless, after hearings, the bill, and after amendments, the bill was voted out of committee. It was scheduled for a vote. We all were invited to come down to Trenton and sit in the gallery and watch this historic moment when New Jersey would pass this reparations bill. We sat there and we sat there, and the bill was never brought to the floor for a vote. And that's where the bill died. Today, we're faced with a situation not unlike that. Again, the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, which has played a leading role on this issue, had to start a campaign, say the word reparations, because again, they didn't want to call the bill a reparations bill. And in this state where African Americans vote overwhelmingly Democratic, in this state that now has a trifecta of political control by Democrats, the governor's office, the state Senate majority there, General Assembly majority there, we can't get our reparations bill out of committee. Also instructive in this area are the experiences in California and in New York. I was quite skeptical for some time on the possibility of achieving reparations. But then the commission was passed in California. And then just this past summer, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, signed into law the reparations bill, and the commission has been assembled and has elected its officers. But just at the end of last month, August, there was a package. The commission had proposed a package of 22 pieces of legislation dealing with reparations. And the two key pieces out of that 22 were the establishment of a new Freedmen's Bureau to determine who would be qualified for reparations, and a reparations fund. Those bills were scheduled to be voted on in the legislature. They were not brought to the floor for a vote. And it's going to be interesting. We should keep our eyes on the experiences of both the California Commission and the New York Commission. To me, the fundamental question that faces us at this time is, how do we build the compelling power to, in fact, achieve the immediate strategic goal? And that immediate strategic goal in New Jersey is the passage of the reparations task force bill. Of course, the first step is to present a compelling argument. And I believe all the committees of this New Jersey Reparations Council have done that job, have made a compelling argument for why New Jersey should pass this bill and provide reparations to African Americans. We are going to have to build a massive mobilization, something akin to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. Of course, we have to, engage in all the conventional activities, but I would propose a few things here in addition. One, we need to expand our base as much as possible. We have a coalition now supporting this council and supporting the reparations bill. We need to expand that to include as many grassroots organizations as possible. I believe we also should engage in a statewide petition drive for passage of the reparations task force bill, a drive that would try to accumulate several 100,000 signatures. This would help us identify a constituency for reparations that could put pressure on our elected officials. I would also propose a statewide conference on reparations that would bring several thousand grassroots leaders, elected officials, religious leaders, labor leaders together to demonstrate support for the reparations task force bill. We're going to need massive education on the issue of reparations. We should enlist the Black press, the independent press, the progressive media for that task. We need to get all Black elected officials on board with the task force bill. I don't even think at this point all of the Black legislators in the New Jersey legislature are co-sponsors of the bill. We need to get them on board, and we need to get as many other elected officials, Black and otherwise, on board. We need to have hearings, not just in the assembly. Why not have hearings at the municipal level, at the city level, and at the town level, where people could speak in support of reparations? Perhaps even establish municipal reparations commissions like Chicago did. Chicago established a citywide reparations commission. Anybody running for office coming through our community should be asked about the issue of reparations. I was glad to see at a forum 2 months ago, I believe the forum was in July, where the issue of reparations was raised to those people seeking to occupy Congressman Payne's seats. All candidates should be questioned about their position on reparations and the reparations bill, including presidential candidates. And next year, we will have a gubernatorial election, and we should query those candidates on what their positions are on reparations. We need to enlist the support of our churches. Just this past week, the National Conference of the African Methodist Episcopal Church came out with a resolution in support of reparations. We should get all denominations to do the same thing. We should enlist the support of labor organizations, the major labor organizations. Some of them have already done so, passed resolutions for reparations at the national level. We need to make this happen at the local level. And we should also enlist the support of student organizations. When I was a student at Princeton University, we held a statewide conference of Black student organizations on the issue of apartheid, drawing representatives from every campus in the state of New Jersey. I think we should pursue something similar at the state level on the issue of reparations. We need to get, it's also to be noted that the Democratic Party platform that came out of the 2024 convention supports the passage of H.R. 40. I think we should try to get the New Jersey State Democratic Committee to come out publicly in support of the Reparations Task Force bill. People have been calling upon President Biden to establish a task force on reparations since we can't get the bill through Congress. Maybe we should also ask Governor Murphy to establish a gubernatorial commission on reparations. And there's also the possibility of putting reparations as a public question, as a referendum on the ballots in those areas where, in those electoral areas where African Americans are a majority and where there would be support for reparations. So those are just some ideas I have. I'd like to present. There are others, but I know I've already exceeded my time, so I'll quit here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Larry. We very appropriately had a little cushion for you, as much as you've earned it. I'm always struck by the combination of both the historical context in a very specific, grounded, local way, in which you remind us that the work that we are doing now is work that others have done before us here in the state of New Jersey. And the aborted opportunity for a bill that was never brought to the floor now 20 years ago reminds us that at the end of the day, the issue of justice in this country is both a moral question and a political question. And the mechanisms through which we solve the political problem, as you rightly point out, give us access to a number of tools, of which you very specifically discussed, from statewide petition drive to holding Black legislators in this state accountable, to being sponsors or co-sponsors of the bill, to bringing the evidence of the need for reparations that this council is doing, to now having the municipal levels take up this work and advancing the conversation, to organizing students across the state as well as labor organizations, and then potentially a public question put on ballots in various districts and counties across the state of New Jersey. I know I could speak for the entire council that we are grateful for your experience in doing so much of this organizing work, and you certainly rose to the occasion as an organizer and bringing insights to how to get this work done. So we look forward to continuing working with you, Larry. And I want to encourage the public, who have questions either for Jesse, Iman, Larry, Saladin, and Madiba as we move closer to the end of this portion of our public session. At this time, I'm going to turn to Richard Roper to invite him in to present for the final portion of the presentations. And Richard, here's a question for you. What can you tell us about the state of U.S. democracy, how to strengthen it, its implications for the contemporary existential crisis that many people describe that we are facing at this moment, and with years of work inside of the system, if in many ways, Larry working outside the system, and here for you working inside the system, what are the implications for where we are in this democracy in terms of our work on reparations?
Thanks, Khalil, for that question. I hope you can hear me. Say so if you will. Okay, great. I think there is little debate these days about the threat to our democracy. This is indeed an inflection point regarding our nation's continued commitment to protecting and advancing democratic principles, or a rejection of such principles, and instead the embrace of autocracy. This is not hyperbole. The threat is real. It is a clear and present danger, and it requires all who care about preserving democracy standing against the effort to bring a halt to America's pursuit of individual freedom that democratic progress embodies. Given the importance of curbing anti-democratic, pro-autocratic forces, those who share this concern must understand that the struggle associated with it will require enlisting as broad an array of participants as possible. The civil, religious, business, educational, and independent nonprofit sectors will all be required to contribute to the struggle. Each sector, I believe, understands it has a role to play in challenging the efforts to subvert and possibly end American democracy. It is critically important that each sector takes up the challenge. Over my nearly 40-year career in local, state, federal, and regional government, in the private sector, higher education, the religious community, and the nonprofit sector, I have developed an appreciation for what each can bring to the struggle awaiting us. While I can speak with confidence about the possible contribution of each, given time limitations, I'd like to focus my remarks on the nonprofit sector and address what might be done by one important component of it, particularly philanthropy. I served as vice chair of the Community Foundation of New Jersey in its formative years. And during the past 3 years, I've served as a nominator for Spark New Jersey, a grant-making entity that provides small grants to Black-led nonprofit organizations in Essex County, Passaic, and Union counties. And for the past 17 years, I've served as a trustee at the Fund for New Jersey, and am currently chair of its board of trustees. These philanthropic organizations are central players in the effort to strengthen and preserve the institutional infrastructure that underpins democracy. Stanford University's Social Innovation Review tells us that the vulnerabilities of American democracy stretch across 4 thematic areas: government infrastructure, the electoral process, civic participation and engagement, and a free, vibrant, and trustworthy media and information ecosystem. The philanthropic organizations I just mentioned are active in each of these thematic areas, and the Fund for New Jersey supports nonprofits operating in all three of these areas. With reference to government infrastructure, for example, the Fund for New Jersey provides financial support to nonprofits seeking to improve state legislative performance, as well as increase diverse representation in government by enabling marginalized groups to participate in policy formation. It, in addition, supports research, advocacy, and policy development to enhance government transparency. With reference to the electoral process, the fund supports nonprofits addressing electoral reform at the local and the state level. With respect to civic engagement, the fund supports nonprofits that promote civic participation efforts of communities more frequently excluded from the political process. It also supports efforts that encourage voter registration, education, and participation. And with respect to media and information ecosystems, the fund supports local news, public media, and nonprofit investigative reporting. It also supports independent journalism and fact-checking organizations to combat misinformation and ensure that the public has access to reliable information. We the People, a philanthropic guide to strengthening democracy, developed by the Center for High Impact Philanthropy at the University of Pennsylvania, maintains that while general elections tend to spotlight highly partisan politics, a democracy is more than ballots and polls. It involves the collective efforts of its citizens to solve social problems. When philanthropy strengthens the capacity to work collectively for public good, philanthropy strengthens democracy. In fact, according to the guide, philanthropy and the strength of US democracy have always been inextricably tied. Policies set by state, local, and federal governments influence neighborhoods, schools, healthcare system, the environment, and our economy. These, among others, are the same issue areas that philanthropy targets for change. So, what does this say about philanthropy's role regarding reparations? To the extent that its investments seek to protect democracy, philanthropy can significantly impact reparative justice by either supporting efforts or undermining efforts to address historical injustices and promote racial equity. Philanthropy can undermine democracy when it allows wealthy donors to impose their personal agendas on society, potentially conflicting with the public's democratic preferences. This can be problematic when donors prioritize their interests over broader societal initiatives and away from democratically chosen initiatives. On the other hand, philanthropy can play a positive role by supporting civil society organizations that advocate for human rights and social justice, thus enhancing democratic participation. In the context of reparative justice, philanthropy has the potential to support efforts toward racial repair and equity. Philanthropy can resource organizations working on reparations and racial healing, helping to address the racial wealth gap and promote a more equitable society. It needs to be acknowledged, however, that the wealth underlying large-scale philanthropy often stems from historical injustices, such as slavery and systemic racism. In sum, therefore, we all have a role to play in protecting US democracy by voting, participating in civil discourse, and by engaging with a philanthropic sector that supports and is committed to preserving and promoting democracy. Thanks for
Thank you very, thank you very much, Richard. I'm really struck by the dualism that you brought up at the end after describing a number of ways in which local philanthropies in New Jersey have been using their financial resources to support pro-democracy efforts in four categories, as you just described: strengthening government, working on electoral reform, encouraging civic participation, and improving the quality and influence in a pro-democratic fashion of our media and information ecosystem. And I think it's not too much of a stretch to say that within the context of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice's task force, or in this case, Reparations Council, philanthropy is playing a crucial role in bringing us together and convening. This is an example of its influence. But the sinister other side is also real, which is to say that so much of what brings us to, as you described in your opening remarks, a clear and present danger to the functioning of our democracy on the eve and possibility of an autocratic takeover of our society also runs through philanthropy, also runs through the work of many billionaires who have used their influence to corrupt government, to limit the power of the people. And so we're reminded that the stakes of what we do here, the nonprofit sector plays a role regardless, and it is up to us to make the case for that role that it will play. Thank you very much.
To be ever
That's right.
vigilant.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At this time, the co-chair of the Democracy Committee is going to return to us. Madiba, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, Khalil. So as my fellow committee members have laid out over the past hour or so, New Jersey's evolution from a slaveholding society to a multiracial democracy has been slow. In 1804, the state passed an act for, and I'm quoting here, the gradual abolition of slavery. As the name suggests, no one was freed immediately, but the law nevertheless contained an elaborate scheme to compensate enslavers for their loss. In 1807, the state passed a law expressly limiting the eligible voter population to free white men, disenfranchising Black people. In 1846, it enacted a law declaring that enslaved people were now lifetime apprentices, essentially trying to rebrand slavery. And in 1865, New Jersey refused to ratify the 13th Amendment, the post-Civil War amendment to the United States Constitution that abolished slavery and involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. Even though the state did accept the amendment eventually, it would be a mistake to conflate New Jersey's belated ratification as an end to the harms of slavery. After Saladin explained the history, Jesse and Iman spoke about modern voter suppression and retaliation for exercising First Amendment rights. Larry and Richard spoke about the ways the democratic process has obstructed the fight for reparations and ways that New Jersey residents and philanthropic communities can positively participate in that fight. The vestiges of human bondage will remain until Black people fully regain their liberty. And that includes the ability to freely and fairly participate in the political process and the development of laws and policies that are responsive to their priorities. Slavery depended on the exclusion of Black people from the body politic, and the ripples from that denial of democracy continue to limit Black people's access to the ballot. They prevent Black people from obtaining meaningful representation and policies that advance their interest. They discourage Black participation in the democratic process. They inflict injury on Black people's dignity, and they impose economic harm. Policies that perpetuate such harms cannot be permitted to continue, nor can policies that would recreate those same harms be permitted to exist. For these reasons, there are a minimum of 3 categories of reparations that New Jersey must pursue in relation to democracy. First, the state must enact legal reforms to expand Black people's political power. Second, the state must provide monetary compensation for the denial of Black political power. And third, the state must provide monetary compensation for slavery itself, returning the value of Black people's labor. In order to expand Black people's political power, New Jersey should pursue a suite of reforms to make every stage of elections easier. For example, allowing same-day voter registration and expanding automatic voter registration to sites beyond motor vehicle agencies would make it easier for eligible voters to actually get on the voter rolls. Ending felony disenfranchisement and adding poll sites in jails would make it easier for disproportionately criminalized Black people to retain their access to the democratic process and force politicians to engage with people who are otherwise discarded. Voter education and outreach, especially coupled with eliminating the county line, would make it easier to make an informed vote free from confusion or bias. Anti-gerrymandering protections would make it easier for that vote to be worth the same as someone else's. And publicly financed elections would make it easier to run for office. New Jersey should also enact a state-specific version of the Voting Rights Act. The United States Supreme Court's relentless attacks on the landmark federal legislation have left voters with fewer protections than they've had in decades. States must fill this gap. It could be particularly valuable to establish a pre-clearance program, which means localities have to run proposed changes to election laws by the Attorney General's office, for example, before they can go into effect to make sure they wouldn't have a discriminatory impact. New Jersey should also adopt a non-retrogression principle, which basically means there's no backsliding allowed either. Changes can only go in one direction. Pre-clearance and non-retrogression would essentially create a one-way ratchet towards a more inclusive democracy. Importantly, the ideas that I'm presenting now do not constitute a checklist that, if completed, will resolve racism in New Jersey in perpetuity. White supremacy is inventive, and evolving harms require evolving solutions. The state's remedies should be targeted to redress the wrongs against Black New Jerseyans, and the state should carefully and publicly contextualize them as such. It would be important for the state to reject any suggestion that Black people are receiving an unearned benefit. Rather, the state is working to heal the damage it caused. The state should also be clear that expanding democracy to fully include New Jersey's Black residents does not cause a deprivation of democracy for anyone else. A government that becomes responsive to Black people is a more responsive government, period. Because political inequality and economic inequality are mutually reinforcing, New Jersey's democratic denials also warrant monetary compensation. Numerous studies have found that economic benefits flow from enhanced enfranchisement, including a decrease of the racial wage gap. The inverse is true too. Curtailing voting rights causes greater economic inequality. Expanding the electorate also changes who gets elected and how they vote. If not for racial discrimination, Black voters may have been able to elect legislators who promoted their economic interest. Voter suppression, gerrymandering, and other methods of reducing political power therefore have a financial cost. New Jersey should recognize that its policies cause financial harm to Black people and compensate its Black residents accordingly. Finally, New Jersey must calculate the wealth that Black people's free labor created for the state and return the value of their work to their communities. A strong majority of Black Americans support reparations, yet few pieces of legislation even broaching the topic of reparations ever make it out of committee, and federal legislation has been introduced and reintroduced for decades. The persistent lack of reparations is itself indicative of a failure of democracy because it shows that political actors are not responding to their constituents. Returning Black New Jerseyans' wealth would be a significant step towards addressing this and correcting that anti-democratic failure. Now, Article 1 of the New Jersey Constitution reminds us that all power is inherent in the people. Article 1 further provides that no person shall be denied the enjoyment or discriminated against in the exercise of any civil right because of race, color, or ancestry. And so, the state of New Jersey has a legal and a moral obligation to compensate its Black residents for the state's historical and ongoing discrimination inhibiting their civil rights. Now, I do want to take a moment to address the elephant in the room, which is even if we generated that groundswell of support for reparations and passed legislation, what do you do about the Supreme Court just striking it down? And I think that's a question that can be reasonably asked on basically any issue, whether voting rights or reproductive autonomy or climate change. We don't have single issue lives, and court reform needs to be part of any social justice movement, as does breaking away from the idea that the Supreme Court is the sole arbiter of constitutionality. As Khalil and other speakers have said tonight, American democracy is at a turning point on a national scale, where it can backslide into authoritarianism or push forward into an inclusive democracy. Slavery is the anti-democratic reservoir into which American authoritarianism taps. And in order to achieve a real American democracy, slavery and all of its attendant circumstances must be stamped out. Doing so requires reparations. New Jersey was the last of the northern states to abolish slavery, but here it has an opportunity to lead the way. Thank you.
Bravo. That was terrific. Thanks so much, Madiba. Really wonderful wrap up and such a powerful reflection of all of the elements that make the case for reparations that this committee has been working so diligently on. And I'm just going to quote you back something that really resonated. A government that responds to Black people is a more responsive government. So thank you very much for those summation comments for the entire committee. I believe at this time we would hear from folks on YouTube. So I'll pause for the organizers to let me know if there are any comments that we should speak to, since that community is not able to engage us directly. And if not, we will move on to the next stage of our public session.
Thanks so much, Khalil. And I just want to thank Khalil as well as the Democracy Committee for really complicating our understanding of democracy in New Jersey, as well as shedding light on the need for reparatory justice in this particular area here in New Jersey. Thank you, Khalil, for such an adroit and masterful job of moderating. And I do want to raise something about shadow citizenship that really sort of appealed to me. And, as was raised, the idea of shadow citizenship, particularly for Black people, is this idea that citizenship for Black folks is not as fully fleshed out, right? It's not the fully realized version. And that's how we think, primarily sort of of the idea of a shadow. But as you are obviously all aware, your shadow follows you wherever you go. And for young children in particular who are afraid of their shadow, and when they realize this, and for those who are haunted by their shadow, for young children, right? Particularly when we think about this notion of haunting in shadow citizenship, it kind of sort of gives us a nice kind of framework for thinking about when folks bring up the idea, why is this happening in the year of 2024? Why is racial inequality, particularly around disenfranchisement or excessive policing, or Black folks being denied fair appraisals for their homes happening in 2024, shadow citizenship helps us to understand and think through these problems. And part of the reason why I brought up this notion of fair appraisals is our president and CEO, Ryan Haygood, was unable to make it today because he attended a bill signing down in Trenton for passage of a bill that the Institute led advocacy on that would strengthen protections for combating discrimination in appraisals. And so he was at that bill signing today to help build up New Jersey civil rights, to help Black folks retain equity and value in their homes and not lose that value just for being Black. Now we're on to the public comment portion of our session. And I just want to lay out a few rules for the public comment portion. And it will be moderated by the co-directors of this committee, Saladin and Madiba. But before we start, I just want to make a few comments. As pointed out in the flyer, only those of you who previously registered will be allowed to speak. You will be limited to 3 minutes. There will be a timer on the upper right of the screen. I will give you a 15-second warning, and I will also give you a 10-second grace period on the other side of the 3 minutes. We will mute you to continue once that grace period is over, no exceptions. If you're unable to speak or get out all of your comments this evening in the time period allotted, you can provide public comments on our website at njreparationscouncil.org. Once again, I'll repeat that, njreparationscouncil.org. You can submit video, audio, even writing to that website. And for those of you who also did not sign up for public comment but would like to, you can please feel free to use the website, njreparationscouncil.org. Also, I would like to let you know that our next public session will be on October 7th. That'll be hosted by their Environmental Justice Committee. Once again, Monday, October 7th. Be on the lookout for that. And finally, during the public comment, it is an important disclaimer: we do not allow hate speech, personal attacks, or threats of any kind. They will not be tolerated, and you will be promptly removed from this meeting. I will now pass the pass it over to our committee co-directors, Madiba and Saladin, to moderate the public comment portion.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. I believe the first person we have here to speak is Daryl Frederick. And after Daryl Frederick goes, Derek Davis is next in line. Do we have Daryl Frederick here? Okay, we can move to the next person then. Next up we have, excuse me, Derek Davis. Okay. I'm getting a, let's see. We'll go to Rosemary Biddings. Okay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. First of all, I enjoyed everything that I heard tonight, and I have a piece here. I'm a member of the New Jersey Faith Allies, and we decided to do a letter to the governor in an effort to get reparations passed. And it's a pretty frank letter, but it does encompass a lot of what was said here. And I'm going to start and read it. It's a letter in the form of a poem. We are the New Jersey Faith Allies, a part of New Jersey Task Force Say the Word Reparations. And due to the dedication of Bishop Stokes and Ryan Haywood in 2021, the birth of New Jersey Faith Allies begun. Now, it shouldn't be necessary to write this letter. After 400 years, you'd think we'd be doing a whole lot better. If life was fair, we would have had our reparations a long time ago, because Black lives are supposed to matter. At least that's what the saying goes. If we had our reparations a while ago, we could have saved many Blacks in New Jersey from the poverty they currently know. The ability to save another and not do so is a shame and a sin. So this is a frank and honest letter about New Jersey slavery and reparations, as the time has passed to pretend. Thus, throughout this presentation, we will invite you to join in by saying our slogan, say the word reparations, as this is the best way we know for this letter to end. The good book says, the truth will set you free. And while that's true, most of the time, it certainly didn't apply in slavery. For what they knew back then is still true today, that slavery was wrong, cruel, evil, not free labor, and to make amends, it's only right to pay. Our purpose is to finally get to the New Jersey reparations bills passed that compensates the ancestors of slaves in New Jersey for enslavement of racial oppression, thus showing that after 400 years, the state has finally learned these lessons and to pay this overdue debt for these human transgressions. Then, too, help eradicate the stench and shame of New Jersey being called the slavery state of the North by name. For shame that New Jersey did horrific things to their slaves to earn that name. Governor, do you want to get rid of New Jersey's horrific, shameful slavery reputation? Then join us by saying the word reparations. Now, New Jersey Faith Allies come from all over the state, every race, nationality, and religion. We stand united together, awaiting your decision to meet your obligation to pay the reparation, for that is our vision. Because we know reparations should be paid, and not doing so is the biggest sin and mistakes that New Jersey has ever made. Then, too, isn't New Jersey's motto liberty and prosperity? Well, the slaves were never liberated from slavery. In fact, many were hung from a tree. And even today, Black New Jerseyans lack Black prosperity because of the wealth disparity. Thus, this motto is false. So we think it's clear to see that New Jersey either has to change its motto of benevolency. So are you ready to say the word reparations? Am I out of time? I am?
Yes, I believe that was your time.
Okay, that was only a small part of it. So I will submit it to you
Please
to be
do.
used in churches and other places like that for and our young people to read.
Thank you so much.
Madiba, I believe, in the queue, am I correct in saying that we have LM Carter? Is that correct?
And that's what I have, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Danny McDonald, welcome.
Hi, just real quick, because I'm driving. I actually sent the name of the book in. It's Radical Reparations by Professor Hunter. It talks about patents and things of that sort. I just want to know if anybody was familiar with it. And if you're not, I would encourage you to get the book. One, because he was born in University of Medicine Dentistry in New Jersey. So I think we need to recognize people who were born there, even though they moved to Philly. But the book is really helpful in terms of he's looking at a whole different way, some of which I think I hopefully not participated, but have actually attended most of the sessions that you've had with different committees. And he's really got a much broader perspective that might be helpful to you guys. I actually bought the book for the CEO of the organization, and I will be delivering it to him. But I encourage everybody, it's a quick read. He doesn't use academics in order to do it. What he does is use stories. And I know Larry mentioned earlier about the Freeman Bank, and he uses that as a story to say, well, when it's only a promise, that wasn't a guarantee, or wasn't what was owed, right? I just say what was owed. So the 40 acres and a mule, he says, is just a promise. But what is owed, for example, he talks in his story about the Freedman Bank. He says that bank alone, right now, there's owed over $1 billion for just that one bank. So, I really encourage you, because he does it in stories and makes it as easy as possible for everybody to read it, and not just people who are scholars. Not to take away from scholars, but I just wanted to say, I really encourage you to get the book. Or borrow Mr. Haygood's that I drop off to him. But the other thing is, Miss Denny, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, did I pronounce your name? Yeah. Denny. Okay. I want to commend you for using the word Black people, because if we were Americans, we wouldn't be asking for reparations in the first place. So whenever I hear people say African Americans or Black Americans, the things that happen to us do not happen to Americans. We're the only people who have to jump through hoops to prove we're American, and that doesn't guarantee us anything. So I just want to, commend you. And you kept saying it, so I'm going to call you. I was going to call your office if I didn't get through. But I really appreciate that. That was, people take it for granted, but Americans don't go through the changes through. Just having the reparations committee. I mean, somebody mentioned earlier how. And I knew about the slave masters getting reparations. I mean, that right there tells you just get reparations, but the people who served as property don't. So anyway, well, thank you all. I appreciate the work you're doing. I appreciate
15 seconds.
The work Mr. Hagan has put together. I know. I'm going. I got to go home. See ya. Take care, everybody. Thank you again for all the work that you do. You can cut me off now.
Thank you, Linda. And drive safely, please. Drive safely.
I will.
We appreciate you. Next up is Deborah Edwards. Is that right? Deborah, you have the floor. Are you there? Okay, then I think then we'll move it along. I see Malcolm. Would you when you introduce yourself, Malcolm, please share with us how to say your last name. You have the floor.
Sure. My name is Malcolm Izova. I would like to first thank the NJRC for hosting this public session. I am a Nigerian born person from who now lives in South Orange, New Jersey. I came to the United States when I was 2 years old and grew up in a diverse household with my father from Nigeria and my mother from Jamaica. Suffice it to say, my connection to the topic of reparation was at first somewhat tangential. My focus has always been on working hard and assimilating into American society. And in truth, I initially had a little understanding of African American history. However, over the last several years, I've been blessed to work in the culturally rich city of Newark, New Jersey. And through my experience, I've witnessed the struggles of Black communities, not only their economic hardships and lack of educational resources, but also the systemic barriers imposed by a society that constantly marginalizes us. I've seen police brutality and I've had friends incarcerated over simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. These experiences have underscored for me why democracy is needed now more than ever. To me, democracy means a system of governance where the voices of all individuals are heard and valued, especially those who have historically been marginalized. In the context of reparations, democracy involves confronting the legacy of slavery, taking concrete steps to address them. This includes creating policies that provide restitution to descendants of enslaved people, ensuring that they have the same opportunities for success and well-being as others. For me, reparations should take a multifaceted approach that not only provides financial compensation to the descendants of enslaved people, that is important, but also addresses systemic barriers to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity. At the heart of the American dream is the assumption that we all have an equal opportunity to achieve the kind of wealth that gives meaning to the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The American dream suggests that our God-given right is to live freely. Yet we still have a population of people that face systematic discrimination more than any other group. Reparations should aim to close the wealth gap that slavery and its aftermath have perpetuated and should involve a national acknowledgement of the harm done, accompanied by sincere efforts to repair it. Because to me, the true essence of reparations is justice. They are necessary steps. These are necessary steps towards ensuring it's reparative, that all citizens, regardless of their background, can participate fully and equally in our democracy. It's about making the promises of democracy real for everyone. I'd like to thank the NJRC for allowing me to
15
speak
seconds.
today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for those comments. I believe the last speaker we have is someone from the Black American Tribe Task Force. Is the speaker present?
Hello. Hi, this is Deborah Edwards. I'm sorry, I was having some difficulty. Am I too late?
No, please go right ahead.
Okay. My comment, and thank you for your presentation. I love the historical backdrop, and gives some very salient points. Um, Two things. One is there is a study that was done, and it's a longitudinal. It's still going on, and it's updated every so many years. I first saw it when I was at Lincoln University in '93. There's a book called Two Nations, Black and White, Separate, Hostile, and Unequal by Andrew Hacker. It looks at the whole spectrum of everything in terms of equalities having to do with Blacks in America. And I think that would be beneficial. The other is, and I would encourage everyone to review it and read it, it's very, very detailed. It goes from economics to housing to environmental to healthcare to you name it, wages. There's nothing left out. The other is that there was a lawsuit that was initiated, just an FYI, a lawsuit that was initiated and it wrangled its way through the New York courts having to do with companies that insured the slaves. And it was Aetna, some major banks out of New York, quite a few. What happened out of that was they told them that unless they could definitively identify each and every one of those persons that may have been a slave, that they were not eligible to receive anything, no reparations, no, lawsuit funds or anything like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I fail to understand how much more we need to review, study, that hasn't been done already. Everything from the NIH. There was a study that was done several years ago having to do with healthcare, and my focus is in healthcare. The other is I'm curious to know if the committee, in terms of reparations, is also looking, because there are also inequities and they still persist to this day in healthcare. Is that a committee that's being looked at, or is there one already established, or is there something in the future, or that will become part of the commission in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, in the same way that we are the democracy committee of the broader Reparations Council, the council does also have a committee that's focused on health issues particularly.
Thank you so much.
Last one. Is that right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat, Saladin?
Yes, Madiba, I was saying, I think that may have been our last question for the evening.
That was the last of the ones we had submitted, but I did just receive a relevant comment from YouTube, which is same-day voter registration should be the low-hanging fruit of reparations. It has bipartisan support in New Jersey, but our legislative leaders refuse to give it a hearing. I think that is as an astute observation. It really sort of makes the point clear about the shortcomings of democracy, and that even when something has majority support, it is not being given due consideration. You're not having folks being like responsive to what the actual residents and community members are asking for. Let's see. We also have a message, a question from Kadira. It says, my question is, will this council solely focus on reparations to those who are indeed descendants of chattel slavery from the USA? I keep hearing for Black New Jersey individuals. However, this claim is specific for a specific group that was harmed. It should only be focused on Black Americans who are descendants of slavery. And if so, how will you go about finding those specific folks? I think John Beer, you had some comments to make on this. I also just wanted to note, though, on that last point, that is an extremely challenging question of how would you go about finding those specific folks. Something that I have had concerns about the idea of proving lineage is that it disadvantages folks who just don't have that documentation for some reason or another. There's been a lot of purposefully obscured history, and it does trouble me, the idea of having to have a piece of paper, or else you just sort of continue to experience that harm.
So thanks, Madiba. And so thank you for your question. And this question has been raised before the council. I would point you to the second session, our segregation session, if you want to watch the recording of that session. I'd also point you to njreparationscouncil.org, where we address the question of eligibility and who are the members and which our council is focused on in terms of achieving reparations. Now, the council has a broad-based understanding of Black New Jerseyans to include all Black people, but we understand that there are different periods for which reparations are being addressed. And we have a sort of lens that expands and constricts depending on the types of reparations or for what time periods. But we do have an expansive notion of eligibility, which to include all Black New Jerseyans, regardless of one's lineage, in here in New Jersey. So I just want to point that out. But if you want to find out more information, please go to our website. Also, our report will go into depth on this question about eligibility and about who is eligible and who actually will receive reparations. But remember that we're also considering structural changes to New Jersey, right? And those aspects aren't going to be limited to certain populations. That's fundamentally going to alter the way New Jersey operates. And so I don't think we want to lose sight of the fact that slavery shaped New Jersey, created the very institutions that shape New Jersey to this day. and that we need to fashion and produce and build alternative institutions to create a genuine multiracial democracy in New Jersey. And so we have a very forward-looking understanding of reparations here, and a notion of abundance as well. So I just wanted to raise that. But I do thank you for your question. And we will also have a bibliography as part of our report. So for those of you who wish to do additional research or want to look up and think about more about these issues, and thank you for the recommendation on the book by Professor Marcus Howard. I have his book right here. And Marcus attended a symposium earlier in the year, and I also was a few years behind Marcus in graduate school as well. So thank you for that. And I think we are all, I think, out for today. If we don't have any more comments, once again.
Yeah, I do want to
Yes.
flag, I did just receive a comment from someone concerned about the constitutionality of reparations, specifically if it is for Black people rather than lineage-based or some other form. And I think something I would want to raise in response to that is basically that any racial justice work is constitutionally vulnerable under the Supreme Court that we have, which I think is part of why Supreme Court reform and court reform more broadly is a necessary part of any work that we do. I think we also need to get comfortable saying, it doesn't pass constitutional muster according to Clarence Thomas, but that does not mean that Clarence has the correct understanding of the Constitution. I think that a lot of power has been relinquished over time in terms of giving the Supreme Court sole authority to say what the Constitution means. And I think that we should take that opportunity to say that, no, really, if you're understanding the 14th Amendment and the other Reconstruction era amendments as you should be, then there is no constitutional problem with this. And I think that's part of the work that Larry spoke about, for example, of building that sort of community support and informing and educating people on this matter and shaping hearts and minds, because I am not willing to concede that reparations is unconstitutional.
I really appreciate that, Madiba, and thank you. I think this is one of the sort of positive aspects of having a constitutional expert like Madiba on our council to give that kind of wonderful insight. And I think we need to keep that in mind, right? We do not want to feed the ground the idea that racial justice is unconstitutional, that reparations is unconstitutional, right? And I do, to Madiba's point, want to keep in mind that Justice Jackson on the Supreme Court always reminds us, and this is important, that the 14th Amendment empowered the legislature to come up with race-conscious remedies to address the harms of slavery, right? And it's the Supreme Court in its history which has circumscribed the power of the 14th Amendment, right? Which has gone against its original purpose, but also the vision of the folks who were involved in Reconstruction. And so I think that's really important that we bear that in mind about the powers of the Reconstructive Amendments, but also about the importance of thinking about, to Madiba's point, the power of democracy, of people shaping the ideas of what is constitutional. Particularly, it seems kind of odd that we live in a democracy where racial justice and reparations are unconstitutional, right? That would seem kind of counterintuitive and against the very things that we're working towards. So just bear that in mind as we organize and think about building a new New Jersey, building a New Jersey that is a multiracial democracy, building New Jersey where no one has to question whether reparations and racial justice are constitutional. So I want to really thank the folks on our committee, Democracy Committee. I really want to thank Khalil. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of the evening, for being here tonight, for listening, for learning, for thinking, for asking such wonderful questions. And I hope you join us next month on October 7th, Monday evening, same time, 6:30, for our Environmental Justice Committee. You will learn a lot. So please join us then. But once again, give it up for our Democracy Committee and for Khalil as well. And I hope you have a good evening, and I hope you think about the role of democracy and the need for reparatory justice in this area. Thank you so much, everyone. Well.